can negatively impact the practice of law. In the United States, over 40 million adults, about 19% of the population, experience clinical anxiety. It's important to remember that if you struggle with anxiety, you're not alone. Anxiety isn't just a challenge, but it can also be a source of valuable information. It can alert us to potential threats and motivate us to take action. It can be our way really of feeling protected in what can feel like an unsafe world. And as part of the conversation about anxiety today, it's important to recognize that mental health isn't about avoiding emotional discomfort, as much as we sometimes think it is. But it's rather about kind of engaging with and working through the feelings that we have. And really, our goal today with the discussion is to normalize and understand the experience of anxiety while also offering practical strategies for managing it. We encourage you to actively participate, ask questions, use the chat, share your experiences and tips. This is a space for you, for kind of everyone here, and we really hope you learn from each other, as well as from us. And with that, I want to say we're really fortunate to be joined by our wonderful LAP senior clinician, Sharon, and our wonderful volunteer, Ava. And as a reminder, the Lawyer Assistance Program is here for you. It's a free and confidential service for bar members and law students. It offers short-term counseling, resources, referrals, virtual support groups, consultations if you're concerned about somebody else, want some resources, or educational programs for your organization. Just a reminder that help is available if you need it. We really appreciate you being here. And we're going to start actually with a poll. So if everybody can kind of take a moment and we can kind of gauge where we are with anxiety this week. Multitasking is not. There's
Just for some of us technically challenged, just remember to scroll down because there's two questions.
Right, there's my anxiety has blank in the past week, and the biggest impact on my anxiety this week has been. I'm gonna let it get to a minute and then I will share this. Just to give a sense of where everybody is, it sounds like a little bit of all over the place, but a lot of people stayed the same this week. So actually, sorry, it's all shifting in front of me. 32% increased significantly, and then 38% stayed the same. And then some of the reasons with biggest was probably work assignments with 31%, home responsibilities, and then health, self brothers, personal relationships. So some different areas. But we did notice kind of when you registered, we asked if you could answer that question kind of as well, essentially. And work definitely topped the list. It was probably actually a similar breakdown to this. So we just want to share. And with that, we will get started talking about anxiety. Sharon, can I actually start with you? Can you clarify kind of what we mean when we say anxiety? And like, what is the difference between the human experience of anxiety versus like a clinical diagnosis or an anxiety disorder?
Sure. So it's good to be here with all of you guys. So anxiety is a normal and also a complex response to stress, right? So it's a good thing because it's there to protect us from danger and allow us to react quickly to an emergency. But like Nikki was asking, if it's excessive worry or overthinking, it significantly affects our personal or professional life, that can become problematic. So I think when it's helpful to think about, when I'm preparing for a big presentation or I'm preparing for the bar exam, right? Like I'm feeling really anxious, as we hear a lot of times from our law students. And that's because it's motivating, right? It's helping us to sort of get through that challenge. And it gets our adrenaline going, right? Which is probably what Ava and Nikki and I are feeling right now with the presentation, right? Like we're on, we have to be here and get going. I think when it becomes sort of the clinical aspect, um, is when it's persistent, intense, and it's disrupting our lives, right? We're not able to give the presentation. We can't show up for ourselves or for anybody else. And that's also a matter of functioning, but it's also the period of time, right? Like it has to be for a long period of time.
Ava, do you have as someone with a lived experience, is there a way you would kind of differentiate the two?
Sure. So it's along those lines, it would be when is anxiety functional or tolerable, and then when is it disruptive and intolerable. I'm always going to have a baseline of anxiety unless someone is able to significantly tweak my brain. And, it has useful effects. So I am very organized and conscientious, and I'm very good with issue spotting, error spotting, avoiding mistakes. To some extent, that can be useful. It's not useful when it is so high that I'm not able to focus and be clear about my strengths. I'd say also another asset is understanding clients' anxiety. I think this is actually a superpower and one that we often don't think about. I work in immigration. It's a very anxiety provoking field, and uh I cannot put myself into clients' minds because I'm not an immigrant, but I can empathize with their anxiety and then try to listen to them and understand what they are asking or what they might be concerned about, and to be responsive in a system that's often inhuman. So that is something that I find anxiety useful for, is the empathetic component.
Really humanizing this
Mhm.
concept.
I
Um,
just want, I, sorry, I just wanted to add this too. I think a lot of times, especially in the last 4 years with social media, anxiety has become more negative than an actual thing that can be useful. And so I think what Ava was saying is really helpful to frame it as something that exists that we might sort of deal with either temporarily, situationally, or all the time. But it's not necessarily a negative.
right, it's just another emotion. It's just then where does it cross that line, which is what you both were talking about, right? Where does it begin to impede? Um, and which is related to this question actually that I'd love to ask. It says, do you see high functioning people experiencing clinical anxiety, like generalized anxiety disorders?
Yeah, hi, it's me. I think Karen would have a broader sense of this, but no, I would say being in this profession, we are very predisposed to anxiety, even if we're not admitting it, even if people aren't diagnosing or saying it, they are, you can see it. Um, and so yeah, it's a huge part of the profession, including many of us that are high functioning, and it's tricky because it does drive the high functioning, as I mentioned, as well as impede it, and you just have to be careful to um to like let it be there when it's useful, but not when it gets in the way.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Jesse, but I feel like anxiety is probably the number one presenting problem that we see with clients. Um, So I definitely, yes to your question, right? Because like the attorneys that we see are very high functioning, and a lot of time they're masking the anxiety without realizing that they're masking it. So it might be coming out as anger, right? It might be coming out as something else, but when you get to the root of it, it's really could be anxiety.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I agree. And the only thing I would say is also adding to that is when they come to us, the manifestation, the physical, is when the physical starts becoming intolerable. And that's where they realize, so they can't stop the, the tension, the ruminating thoughts, is those physiological symptoms that really drive sometimes clients to reach out.
Mhm.
And sometimes they're not reaching out to us first, right? There might be GI distress, so they go to their primary, right? A lot of times it could be migraines or things that don't necessarily sound like anxiety, or, oh, that's not anxiety, and you push it aside, right? So I think by the time a client comes to us, it's either unmanageable, like Jesse's saying, or maybe their primary, someone has suggested, hey, why don't you call the lab so they can sort of help you through this?
That kind of connects to the next question of kind of how, in what, which you've talked a about a little bit, kind of in what ways does anxiety kind of manifest internally versus kind of externally versus what we notice versus what others can notice. Sharon, if you want to start with that, and then Ava, jump in.
Sure. I mean, I think we've already sort of talked about the things that we might be able to see or at least feel, right? Like our heart rate might be increasing. We might be sweating, like sweaty palms, GI issues. A lot of times people will say like their heart is racing, they're having chest pains, which can be true, right? Like the stress of everything is literally increasing your heart rate, which could be more of a panic attack and not a heart attack. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate because they feel very similar. I think what's important to remember is that you can't necessarily see anxiety, right? Just like you can't see other chronic health issues or depression. And so even though someone might appear like a little more stressed out or like a little anxious, as we always say, they might not actually be feeling that way. And so it's important to recognize like the way you feel anxiety might not be how someone else is feeling it.
Yeah, I think it's individualized. In cognitive behavioral therapy, at least as I've done it, you learn to break down thoughts, physical sensations, and emotions. I think so, to try to get some clearer sense of, because these can sometimes feel overwhelming, like they're blurring together, but actually what your mind is doing in terms of like thoughts that have some sort of verbal form, emotions that don't really have a verbal form, maybe, and your body, these are distinct, and you can just learn to try to get some clarity by separating them out and addressing them separately, rather than feeling that it's like an overwhelming blur.
What is the practice that you use to do that? Like, what does that look like, I guess?
I'll put in the chat. I highly recommend this one workbook that I used like 20 years ago. There's many ways to do CBT, and I'm not a clinician, blah blah blah, disclaimer, but this has been useful to me. And there's just different ways to try to understand anxious thoughts and try to address them with a combination of like analyzing them, talking back.
Mhm.
Mindfulness is what I use. You could do biofeedback or ways to get in touch with your body, exercise, and ways to try to calm down the body when it is being too much. So I'll write that in.
Thanks, Ava. I think I think those are things we'll also probably get a little bit deeper in kind of as we go along in this conversation. But I guess I want to kind of make a specific distinction that I think can be hard for people, particularly high functioning people, as somebody kind of asked, in this like, when is the anxiety serving me to be high functioning? And when is the anxiety no longer serving me and it is draining the resources and energy that I have, or is preventing me from doing something that would be to my benefit or impacting my well-being, but I'm still functioning? Like I think functioning is a challenging just determining factor to like who is defining what functioning is. So I guess how do we distinguish, right? Productive purpose, barrier.
I don't know. I'm pretty like I feel like I have a very intuitive sense. If I am suffering, then it's bad. And I'm very tuned in. Like Sharon was mentioning folks who might be presenting with GI issues or something or physiological issues and they're not sure. I've always been very aware of my emotions as a necessity because they're strong. So maybe others or Sharon have ideas for how people tend to struggle or tend to succeed in identifying that.
Before Sharon shares that, what I'm going to reflect is what you said is I pay a lot of attention to the actual like feelings I feel, right? Like what is happening in my body, the emotions that I'm feeling, and like identifying those. It sounds like help you distinguish. Is that?
Yeah, so in true lawyer nerd like fashion, the book that I'm gonna drop in the chat is very much like into super analysis of here's how I'm thinking. Here, like how true is this thought? How likely is it to happen? What if it happened? Like, and you go through all these steps, and that was extremely helpful to me. And it requires a lot of awareness and effort. Now it's not overwhelming, it's just you need to put some time into it. That's been my preferred method for those who are not really into that. There might be a lot of other ways to do other approaches. I know like physical ones where if your body is really raging, you can try to soothe it. That could also help because it's all the thoughts, emotions, and the physical sensations are all connected.
So for those who aren't as intuitive or want to even think about how they're feeling, which I think we see a lot of times with clients, right? Like I'm going to push it down because if everybody was like Ava, then we wouldn't be in business. And so I think that it's also, you know, to answer your question directly, Nikki, like, you know, how do we know if it's serving us? I think a lot of times, honestly, with clients, it is serving them, right? And so they're not really recognizing that, oh, I'm not addressing what I need to address with my family, or I'm not doing things that are giving me joy, right? Because I'm successful at work, the anxiety is driving me, so nothing's actually wrong, right? And that's hard, right? Because it's helping you with your job, right? Like being a lawyer is also maybe not ruminating, but like problem solving and sort of thinking about, well, what about this and what about that, right? And so when does it become rumination versus I'm doing my work? And I think there's a fine line there. And so I think you just really have to know yourself to know, like, am I responding to something and it's helping me achieve my goals? You know, or am I not getting enough sleep at night and I'm having actual physical sensations, um, you know, where I might need to address, which I think is difficult, especially if you haven't sort of done that early in life. It gets harder and harder if you're not in tune with yourself. Practice, yes.
What I also though heard was two things, I think, was essentially the absence of, that sometimes it's about the absence of, not the actual consequences. Maybe absence of things in your life. Maybe it's absence of energy. Um, and then the other is what something you said along the lines of like moving you towards your goals, right? Like it makes me think of ACT therapy, right? Acceptance and commitment therapy. Like, am I living am I moving towards this like meaningful, fulfilled life or not? Um, and so is anxiety like actually helping me get there, or is it preventing me from getting there? Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times with clients, the answer is yes, I am getting there because look at where I am in my career. Right. But then it's, oh, I don't, you know, that relationship didn't work out, or, you know, the other things. And so it's that balance. Right. And so you have to sort of parse through like, what are my goals, both professionally and personally? And I think if you've reached sort of like the therapy door, you have a more of an understanding of that and there's less pushback. But you have to sort of know what you're truly wanting at the end of the day.
Taking a step backwards, if we've identified, okay, maybe it's not serving me right now. Maybe it's more than I can kind of manage, right? It's probably why a lot of people are here. Does it start with like identifying and understanding like what my triggers are for anxiety, right? Like for some people, I think lots of things elicit anxiety. And then for some people, there might be, we saw 40 some percent or something with work responsibilities really impacted my anxiety. So are there strategies that could be helpful to identify and understand what the triggers for anxiety?
I've used the CBT technique of you record like at different points in the day, you record what's your anxiety, what happened. Now I like again, I have an intuitive sense of what would it have been, but sometimes if you're confused about the causality, that could help because you're just recording to see what's going on. Could this have been a trigger?
Kind of writing down, keeping a record.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm glad that you sort of reminded us about the internal versus the external, Eva, because I think that, you know, we can definitely talk about what we can do in terms of journaling or mindfulness, or other techniques if we understand what our bodies are going through, right? But if we have absolutely no sense, like there's a disconnect, I know Jesse and I talk about this a lot in our bar prep group when we talk about anxiety. We talk about taking our thoughts to trial, right? Which everyone gets excited about, right? It's about questioning, like, what's the evidence that this is actually going to happen in the future, right? Like, emotions are thoughts, right? Like we're getting our information from how we're feeling or maybe how we're thinking. And so those data points are great, but do they actually add up to something traumatic that might happen in the future. And so I think it's really important when we're overthinking, right, when it's coming cortex based and not that fight or flight response where it's physical, to ask ourselves, what's the evidence here?
So in short, it's essentially right. Like, just because I think it doesn't make it true.
Yep.
And then being conscious of whether that's feeding kind of the anxiety response. And then using your lawyer skills to look at that, at the evidence. Or
Yeah, I think a lot of times with clients, it might actually make logical sense, right? If you're sort of thinking it through, but you have to remind yourself that that cortex is it's triggering the amygdala, right? The worry is triggering the amygdala. And so sometimes it's sort of hard to parse out like what's anxiety versus what's actually happening, right? And so it might help to write it down. It might help to talk to your spouse or a coworker or a friend or a therapist to sort of get some objective feedback.
So kind of challenging the thought process is very useful and clearly a tool in this space. But what happens when I'm just like completely overwhelmed and anxious and kind of have low capacity? And I have not yet developed that as my go-to, right? Like that is a practice kind of we have to develop over time, I think sometimes. So I'm short on all of that. What is like a healthy coping strategy I can use when things feel challenging, when my capacity is low?
I think, Sharon, do you still have that file called like what to do when everything's not okay? Because there's like some list about physical strategies you can use, like when was the last time you drank water? When was the last time you ate? When was the last time you were outside? Like, and then you do these little things, which we often forget. So that's one intervention, is there's simple physical strategies to try to ground you. I'm not going to say this applies if you're having a panic attack. I don't know about that, but if it's something else, just like you're feeling overwhelmed, but you can still control yourself, there's things you can do. Sometimes I think you should treat it as a sick day because you're going to need to rest to continue being productive, and you can and you're not functioning very well anyway if your thoughts aren't clear. So there's physical interventions. There's mindfulness practices of compassion towards the self. There could be social supports, like reaching out to people to try to know that you need support. Just like it could be helpful to keep a list of things that are effective for you, so that when you're not feeling totally in control of your faculties, like you can go back to that and look. It's just like if you're sick with the flu or something, you would like I or COVID. Like last time when I had COVID, I was Googling like, what do you do? Because I don't like you might not even remember, and then you can just follow the steps.
Beautiful.
Attorneys love lists, so I think that's a great way to go about it. Sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
No, I was just before I shift, I guess two things. One is if anybody has kind of go-to strategies themselves that they want to share, I welcome those in the chat. You're welcome to come off. I guess one of my kind of questions in that go-to space is I do think like we're not talking about the cortex space, because cortex right feeds amygdala, but like that fight flight response that's happening when I'm feeling anxious, my palms are sweaty, my heart's like racing, whatever is happening for me. What are the things that you kind of Sharon, like what are the things you talk to clients about accessing when you're in that space so you can figure out what the next right step is? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously it depends upon the client, so it's gonna be different for everybody, right? I think generally speaking, we talk about grounding techniques. And so that can look like physically going outside and putting your feet on the grass, right? It can look like putting your hands in some cold water, right? So like you sort of come to. My favorite go-to grounding exercise is 3-3-3, right? So it's three things you can see, three things you can hear, and three things you can touch. Especially when clients are in sort of like a state of panic or physical distress, like that's a really easy thing to remember. But I think you sort of have like a little list, right? Like Ava was saying, I love when folks put like a little list on like a sticky note, right? Like put it on your computer, like on the side. And that way, when you're in it, you're probably working, so near the computer. You can just look at it and pick one, right? You don't have to think about it. You don't have to Google anything. And then you sort of figure out like what works.
Yeah.
On top of that, though, like the three biggest things that we talk to clients about, which are so simple, right, is like healthy eating, sleep, like adequate sleep, and body movement. I think body movement is the most important. It can be just like going for a 10-minute walk, right? Like it doesn't have to be anything huge. Because when we are moving our body, our sympathetic nervous system is decreasing, right? Like so our heart rate goes down, our blood pressure, goes down, and then the anxiety goes down. And it might not happen like in that moment, but when you continue to do the walk, right, your body remembers, like muscle memory. And so just to remember that those three things are really important for overall reduction of anxiety.
Simple and not easy. Somebody in the chat was sharing, which I think is exactly right. When they feel anxious, getting close to the ground is possible. It is literally grounding your body in the ground, right? So they're talking about sitting on the floor, lying on the floor, walking outside without shoes on, ideally, all kind of help with that like grounding feeling. And it will be different for everybody. And it will be different for everybody. And different moments may require different things is what one of the things I would say, right? Like depending on kind of what that response is. I will say I have an 8-year-old who experiences anxiety and smell is very strong for him. Like it quickly pulls him out. So we have like some, I don't know, like essential oil kind of thing. So like he'll sniff and it really like, oh, he like gets centered in that moment and it's like a quick blood brain barrier, whatever, like whatever that is. It can shift him fairly quickly. So just thinking about all your different senses in a way of grounding. YouTube for 5 minutes, guided meditation, right? Then you don't have to think to meditate, right? You can like listen to somebody else tell you what to do because sometimes you need like direction when you're stuck in that space. So I love that idea. One of the others I would say, go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about your 8-year-old. And so I
Yeah.
was thinking like self-soothing, right? And so if you are near a child or a spouse or a parent or a dog or a coworker that you feel, comfortable with, like asking for a hug or giving a hug for 30 seconds, right? Like your oxytocin literally increases, which reduces the anxiety. Scientifically, you need the hug.
If that's the space you're in. It depends on the space you're in. That's what I would qualify, but yeah. And the other is, okay, so those are like body-based grounding. Is there cognitive like base ground, right? Like, is there some way I can use my brain to ground? Which Sharon, it sounds like 333 was one.
I like listening to music or things that are not activating the typical parts of my brain for thinking.
Music's a good one. Listening to music and dancing, right? You're both like engaging that brain part and the body. One that I've talked about with clients before is counting. So not like 1, 2, 3, 4, because that's like kind of easy and like too rote, but like if you count by like sevens, right? 7 plus 7 is 14, 14 plus 7 is 21, like, or 9 plus 9. Counting by a certain number like that requires you to actually have to think a little bit, unless you have that all memorized and choose a harder number. But I don't. 7s and 9s require some amount of thinking. And it gets you out of kind of that activated space and gets you into the present moment. That can be, you can be in a meeting and count by 7, right? Nobody would even know. They might notice you're not paying attention, but you probably won't be anyway if you're filled with anxiety. So it's okay. I appreciate everybody really sharing there. So really helpful.
And Nikki, can I add one thing?
Yeah, please, Jessie.
I just want to add a little disclaimer. I know some clients I work with try to say, well, I try to talk myself out of it. And I would say be careful there. Because if your body is activated, you may not be receptive to those things you're trying to say, I can do this. Why am I so anxious? Because that actually is going to feed the anxiety. Again, the goal is once your body is activated, is you want to try to calm your body. Then you can start really being able to do that cognitive to be able to identify what triggered you. But trying to talk yourself out in that moment may not work.
That is such an important distinction. Thank you, Jessie. Right. So it's this idea of like calm the body before, right? It's calm the body before jumping into your thinking brain. Your thinking brain really is often what gets you into this mess. So like, don't use that part yet. Like calm the body, then you can kind of go into it. Don't jump straight to. Go ahead, sure.
I was just thinking about, our law student, like in our bar prep class, where they're like, I don't have time, right, for any of the things that you're suggesting, right? Like I have to sort of talk myself, like give myself a pep talk. And I think in those situations, like you pick a 5 to 10 minute thing from that little list, right? So if you have to finish that assignment, you have to talk to your supervisor, whatever it might be, right? There's not enough time between work and home life. If you're feeling activated, like just do a small thing. You might still be activated, right? It might not happen until the next day when you sort of try to complete your stress cycle by taking that walk or by dancing or listening to music. And that's okay. You don't have to sort of rush yourself out of the activation. I think Jesse's point is just really important, that you shouldn't you really can't talk yourself out of it, because it's not going to flip the switch. It's just going to make it worse.
So if I'm going to connect to that and take it further, right? So I can't think my way out of it. And then also, what if I can't control my way out? Right? Like, what if the situation or a challenge that is triggering my anxiety is external, right? Employer, workplace, relationship, something that is outside of my control. How do I manage or handle that? How do I manage or handle that?
I mean, it's a life question, isn't it? There's most of life is outside of our control. Um I guess like I would just think, how have you handled other things that are similar to this? Like can you find people to talk to? How would they, what's their perspective? Because at the end of the day, that's life. Um I don't know. If it's a specific job, you can talk to other people who have similar jobs to get some perspective on whether your workplace is normal. If it is toxic, please leave if you can, when you can. I know there's all sorts of considerations, but being in a toxic job will warp your sense of reality and will make it harder for you to adjust to a normal workplace, which could be more damaging than the benefits of staying. But otherwise, if it's just life has its ordinary heartaches and obstacles and disappointments. I found that meditation practice and the philosophy behind it has been extremely helpful for me. I don't have a theistic religious practice, but that's what I use. Some people will have a faith practice or a philosophical framework for how we approach these sorts of disappointments in life. And in terms of anxiety, it's all part of the package there, because to the extent we think we can control things by worrying, we are setting ourselves up for disappointment. I think also in a context in a rich industrialized country in the 21st century where we've gotten used to thinking we can control everything, there's actually a book where, or several books on anxiety that theorize that one of the reasons anxiety is so high in these particular contexts is that people have gotten accustomed to thinking that we do have control where we don't have control actually as humans. And so it's like I found it useful to reflect on that. Yeah.
That's a great reflection.
Yes to all of that. I think sort of what you were saying, Ava, about, when you can get out of the toxic work environment, right? Like sometimes you don't have control over certain situations, right? And so the question is like, how do I deal with my anxiety with this situation that I'm in? And I think sometimes, in working with clients, we sort of have to identify like what can I let go of, right? Like what is just completely out of my control, and I'm not, managing up or micromanaging or whatever it might be. What can I literally let go of, and what do I have control over? Because it's the only thing you can do, right? A lot of times we've sort of worked with clients in terms of how to deal with that manager, right? Or how to get out of that job. And you can only do so much, like Ava was saying, right? And it's also sort of building your resilience too, right? Which is also focusing on the things outside of that, right? So if we're talking about work, it's what am I doing after work, right? Where I find enjoyment, where I find meaning, where I find value. And if it's not work, right, you just flip it. And so I just think that what Ava was saying about, sort of like where we are in our world right now, right? There's a lot of things in the last 4 years that we have no control over. And if we focus on that and we try to control it, what is that going to do at the end of the day, right? Cause more anxiety.
Mhm. Well, 'cause,
Yeah,
like-
go ahead. I would, yeah, I'd say it's important to have a life outside of work. Remember who you were before law school. What did you like? It's important to have community and solidarity. And like in my field in immigration, for instance, I've tapped into a lot of Facebook groups and listservs of immigration lawyers. This is a pretty stressful niche of law, and people are very helpful to each other by and large, and that's extremely useful. And find colleagues that you feel comfortable with and open up, because it's going to make you a better lawyer to be authentic and honest, and it's going to be good for them too. That's how humans have managed extremely difficult circumstances for our history, and just to be there for each other and to keep showing up, and that's just how we're going to keep doing it.
love that importance of the connection, right? Like that connection space can do a lot for anxiety, particularly when it's things outside of our control. I was thinking about exercise I do sometimes in presentations, and that's called a circle of control. And you have to put kind of all your worries in either the biggest circle, which is outside of my control. I can't control anything. Influence, which I can like impact, but I can't fully control. And then control is like basically me, right? I control my behaviors, my whatever. And how some people will put everything in the big circle, and some people will put everything in the little circle, and it is all about their own perspective, right? Like it's I find it a fascinating thing, and what that says, right, about so much of this is like cognitive based. Like there's so much thought happening in this space about how we perceive things, what our mindset is. um so kind of related to that, I guess. So if anxiety is influenced by thoughts, like are there cognitive techniques? I think Ava, you were mentioning, so you mentioned some CBT before, that people should be aware of that could be helpful.
Yeah, that I've used the technique in the workbook that I put in the chat. It's been very helpful for me. And like talking to people who have perspective and whose judgment you trust on, like, how are your thoughts presenting? Does this make sense? Are there other ways of looking at it? Is your mind like distorting your sense of reality?
I think that we sort of touched on this before, but making that list, right? Like self-monitoring, sort of going through, how do I change this unproductive thought? Notice sort of when the thoughts are coming up. Question it, right? Like see if it actually is accurate, test the belief, and ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen, right? A lot of times with clients, we go to that worst case scenario because that's what the brain likes to do. And then we have to sort of walk it back. We don't want to keep doing that because that's just feeding the anxiety train. I think a lot of times with attorneys, we do like a cost benefit analysis, right? Because that's always helpful, Conpro. And then also thinking about like, what are the alternatives to the situation? Again, just like using the attorney brain, right? Like making those lists, sort of thinking it through, and reframing whatever cognitive distortion, we're using at that time.
What is a cognitive distortion?
So,
Like just right, like I think we just talked about
Yeah.
CBT, but like we haven't fully maybe identified it for people who don't know, who aren't in this realm.
Well, wouldn't it just be it's a thought that is not in accord with reality, or it's significantly it maybe there's part of it that's in touch with reality, but a lot of it isn't, to the point that it's not an accurate reflection of anything other than one's own like internal anxiety.
That's basically it. I think we might throw a list in the chat, but there's like a list of cognitive distortions that we'll use with clients. One of several of the ones that I find come up a lot: catastrophizing, right? Sort of dreading the future and predicting the negative outcome. And even though the evidence doesn't actually suggest that, a lot of times it's all or nothing thinking, right? Or black or white thinking. And sometimes personalization, right? Like it's my fault in some way, no matter what the topic is.
It's about me.
Yeah, it's about me. It's not about anybody else.
Yeah, I've also seen there's the sense that like because I'm worrying I'm gonna go crazy or so maybe that's a variant on catastrophizing, or conversely, if I don't worry something bad is going to happen. Like worry is the controller. And this like yeah, there's a lot of things you'll start to see once you get into the analysis of cognitive patterns. I found extremely helpful.
Right. And really the whole point of them is to start to be cognitive distortions are essentially shortcuts your mind goes to, right? They say, oh, I'm worried about this presentation. The shortcut is I'm going to predict the future that my mind's going to go blank when I begin this presentation. And now I can prepare for the fact that my mind is going to go blank when I start this presentation. Like it is a way to try to control, because that's what anxiety is. We want a sense of control about things that are uncertain or things that we don't know about, like we cannot control or predict. I'm just going to read something from the chat real quick. One of my favorite quotes, no amount of anxiety makes any difference to anything that is going to happen. Which is it's great. I'm going to read it again. No amount of anxiety makes any difference to anything that's going to happen. Right in that space where you're going far. If it's the anxiety that is like getting you to study for the test, sure. But like, it's right. It's where it goes a little bit more than anyway, circling back, cognitive distortions, shortcuts your mind takes, right, to try to feel in control. And when we can start to notice our go-tos, because we all have go-tos, right? Some people are much more like catastrophize. So like my mother catastrophizes all of the time. She is like, this is going to be the end of the world. And I'm like, but is it really? And it's like a thing I know she does. So I'm like able to just recognize it. I do not use those words with her because that won't go over well. But like for myself, I know I have a tendency to like emotionally reason. Like if I feel it, I think it might be true. Thoughts are not feeling, like thoughts aren't facts, right? So, but the more we know what our go-tos are, the more we can be mindful of them and we can catch them. So we're not believing, right? So we're not taking them as fact, kind of what Ava was talking about in this process, and Sharon's been talking about of like kind of catching them, starting to argue against them. One of the tools I've heard with catastrophizing, like worst case scenarios, is you also have to say what the best case scenario is going to be. And you have two opposite sides of the spectrum, and you say them out loud, and you realize really neither of those are at all realistic, like, right? And then so it kind of brings you back to a middle ground space. But there are different techniques we can use with different distortions. That's my understanding, at least, of that.
Yeah, I was going to add to, identifying the distortion if you decide to have a family one day or you have family one day is really helpful so that you're not passing on, right? Like the anxiety is not coming from a place, Nikki was just talking about her mom, right? And becoming a therapist makes you think about your distortions, obviously. But if you're not in our field, I think it's helpful to recognize like, oh, that was what was being taught to me when I was a kid. Am I doing that? Or am I doing the opposite, right? Like, am I overcorrecting? Because I don't think we're sitting around thinking about which distortion we're using.
Maybe after some therapy, sure. Okay, so we got cognitive distortion space. Maybe I'm in the midst of a particularly acute like challenge or like major trigger at the moment. Things feel that thing feels very overwhelming and is escalating my anxiety. Any ideas on how to kind of approach managing your anxiety when it's related to, let's say it's an acute deadline, maybe that you're really feeling?
Yeah, so I think this is related to an earlier question about having an overwhelming situation. Yeah, like my general approach would be to treat it as a sick day and do all those things if you actually have a deadline. So if assuming you have a manager and you're not self-employed, like a manager who's reasonable would understand if you are incapacitated and unable to meet a deadline and would needs to put the fact that something's due ahead of like whatever vanity or ego might be in the way. And so just like someone might be sick or might be overwhelmed with work load, the manager should be able to help you to meet the deadline or to reassign it or something. And if not, then again, you have a management problem where you're working, but like you do what you can to meet the exigent need. But in the long term, for you to self-preserve and to continue to be productive professionally and to continue to be healthy personally, like you are going to have to be in a situation where you can not be getting things that are constantly triggering anxiety, and to work on the confidence to tackle them. But yeah, like if you are uh worn down, if you're like I was gonna say out of order, if you feel like you're out of order, if you feel like you need a rest, like you have to attend to that just like any health condition if you're gonna keep going. So all the things we were talking about the physical side, the dealing with your thoughts, dealing with your emotions, having a list, whatever, that's all what I would recommend.
Your question makes me think of a conversation I had with my best friend the other night, who's an attorney in DC. And she is working through all of her, sick days and days off. Like she does not take a day off, whether it's COVID or whether it is her anxiety. And it's challenging, right? To see someone you care about not take the day, like Ava's saying, right? To not sort of set the boundary and do things that feel realistic, just do everything, right? Over the course of our friendship for 30 years, she has burned out, right? And it is hard to see. So you do what you can to sort of remind that person, like, this is why you have sick days, right? Work isn't everything, which I know is very hard to hear as an attorney. But I think that to be able to even do the things that Ava's talking about, right? Like taking it a step at a time, doing the things that are easiest. You also have to recognize that you have to take the time. You have to like take a step back to recognize that if there's something triggering coming up, to take care of yourself, right? Or if there's someone in your life or at work where you recognize that they are sort of getting to that point where they might need a reminder, if you're close enough, to just to give them a gentle reminder, so that they don't sort of tumble down.
You need to take care of yourself.
What's up?
What does take care of yourself look like, right? Like I think we say take care of yourself, but like what does that mean? Like in practice, what does that look like?
So in the last couple decades, or maybe just a decade, there's been a rise of the idea of self-care and then a criticism of the idea from various quarters as being either too much about consumerism, too narcissistic. I don't know, there's like some sexism in there maybe. I think like it's really important for us to think about what keeps us healthy. We don't have to use this term, but you deserve it to yourself. The people you love deserve it for you to be healthy and functioning, and whatever that looks like. I don't think we who are coming into this call are people who are at risk of like living our lives as narcissists and hedonists and self-indulgence. I think like we're on the other side, we're more likely to deny ourselves. I don't think we have to worry about self-care. I'd say there's also a concept of community care, which is to get beyond just the self, which is that we should take care of each other. And that means allowing yourself to be taken care of, as well as doing whatever you're doing to care for others so that we can build our community resilience, which is also an important part of our health. So I would put those forth. And like what it looks like is very individualized, but it has to be understanding your human dignity and that you're not a cog in a machine, and that capitalism should not be eating you up and spitting you out. The thing with the work, with the days off, like when you look at the history of any benefits we have in this country where employers either voluntarily or involuntarily have to not totally run roughshod over workers, like, some of it was due to activism. Some of it was due to employers realizing that if they want to compete for talent when we're looking at the higher educated jobs, that they need to offer benefits. And like things like sick days where people or short-term or long-term disability insurance or vacation days, anything where people can continue to be productive, where the employer can maintain the value of its investment by the person not burning out and leaving, like that's really important. These exist for a reason. I know management varies a lot in terms of what you can actually do with your company's policies. But you like, to the extent you can, I think you absolutely must take them. It's imperative for your health, and it's imperative for you to be able to be valuable to your employer and like to the world because you're a full human being. So that's what I would say for my like ethos of care.
I'm just going to add, personally, I like the term preventative care, because I think a lot of times folks will say like, I'll sleep when I die. That's not a thing. Right? Like it's self-care. They take it as, let me do something after the other thing happens, right? Like after the big presentation after. Whereas preventative is like, what am I doing so that I'm not burning out at the end, right? And so I think that it's better to sort of think about it as it's happening every day,
Mhm.
right? Not a like, I'm going to go take that bath. Let me go through the list, right? Like I've done all the things. I should feel better, right? Which I think a lot of times happens with clients, right? We try to sort of infuse things, but if you're not getting something out of it, then checking it off the list doesn't actually count.
Thank you both for that. I'm going to tie that into we have 2 questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. Cognizant of time, one I actually kind of think ties into this, like taking care of self, in that one of the questions is like, how do you deal with long-term avoidance, which is what anxiety feeds, right? It's not that you're like fearing catastrophe, it's just that you don't want to feel bad, so you avoid doing XYZ because you don't like the discomfort, essentially, that might happen. So I'm curious what you would say to that.
Yeah, so there's a technique, exposure therapy, which kind of gets a bad rap because I think it's stereotyped as like, I'm afraid of flying. Okay, we're gonna make you like go jump off this plane or like whatever. But no, it's actually as Jesse was mentioning in the chat, there's ways of introducing yourself to stimulants that are feared in ways that are humane and that aren't going to traumatize you, and then that can be very helpful because it just gets you it demystifies the thing, the trigger, and like can get you used to. This is when situations are reasonable that you could confront. This is not about like doing extremely high risk stuff that there's no reason in the world for you to do. It's just like your everyday things. So yeah, that and like because it is very easy to avoid things and then it gets worse and worse. Like I absolutely have benefited from doing things that are anxiety provoking and risky, and that's made my life much better.
You practice like the discomfort, surviving the discomfort.
You have to, yeah, if you're going to grow and just feel more comfortable in the world, for sure.
I was just going to say, Walter, when you asked that question, I was thinking of clients that say, I'm avoiding that email, or like I'm avoiding even like the ding. Not maybe avoiding, but like not responding to it because they're having like a literal physical reaction to whoever just emailed them, right? Or things like that. And even before you take that first step, I think you have to recognize like, why is this causing me to jump? Right? Like, what is this? What's going on here? And then if you're not in therapy, sort of figuring out like, how do I deal with the distress of that triggering event? Right? Because none of us want to feel distress. We're not like, yep, I woke up today. Let's go feel that. Right. But that's what we're avoiding. We're avoiding the distressed feeling. And I think a lot of times, maybe not now, but when I was growing up, we're taught like, oh, you're fine, keep going, right? There was no social emotional learning for kids at the time. And hopefully that's changing over time, right? But it's really sort of getting used to feeling it and sort of working through that feeling.
Right. And in recognition of time, I want to, the kind of final question we had was just about kind of what resources are available or would you recommend? But so I'm going to tie that into though to a question we got that was essentially like any suggestions on how to find a therapist, because when they list what they specialize in, many of them end up sounding alike. So I'm tying those kind of questions in together.
I put resources in the chat. I'm not sure about a therapist, but Sharon always has good recommendations in my experience.
I say for the therapy part, if you're comfortable, feel free to always give us a call or send us an email because we can definitely help you sort of parse through all the acronyms under, next to the person's name and sort of what gets you the person that you need, right? Because I think it's really difficult. If I was to find an attorney, I would think that they're all the same. Not really, right? But like it's the same thing, like your profession. So definitely reach out and we can sort of walk you through it.
And I mean, definitely like we love hand holding people to get them to this point. But for anybody that's kind of like actively in the midst of it, I mean, the answer, so I think the answer is one, it's all about your comfort with that therapist. If you are not comfortable and do not feel safe, not that it's like therapy is not comfortable, right? We push a lot of like boundaries, and it can be very uncomfortable to look at yourself. But that you have some sense of safety with the other person and comfort with the other person, or connection to the other person, like that is very important. Or whether it's just like respect, but whatever it is, it's that relationship dynamic is very important. So I would say consulting with them before settling. It's okay to date therapists and ghost them and go to somebody else. I mean, it's fine. Like we all get it. And that the other thing is just think about what is effective for you. Like CBT, AC ACT, things like that are very effective for anxiety. But you might want something that is like somatic and very body based. So that might be worth like reaching out, and we can have a conversation on kind of what you yourself are looking for with this anxiety, because there are lots of different types of therapies. We actually have like 3 minutes. Look at that. But we are kind of happy to open up for any other questions, and we will hang around if anybody wants to stay on afterwards. We appreciate everybody's time. We would encourage you to ask for help. There are a ton of resources available. Ava has shared many of them, which I will take from the chat, and also I'll send out an email with a recording and then kind of a list of resources like books and websites and some worksheets and things along those lines. We're happy to do
Sure.
that. And
I'd also say sometimes like asking people you know and trust who's seen a therapist, either local or if the therapist is virtual, if they have recommendations, could be helpful.
yeah, it's a great point. Use your resource, right? Like use your network.
And I'm going to stop the recording in case anybody has a question that they would prefer to ask without it being recorded.
Good job.